4, 3, 2, 1, start.
Everybody, greetings from Odisha Orthopedic Association. We call this as OJOT. By that we mean Odisha Journal of Orthopedics and Trauma. And we are having this season 2, 2021, the first episode of a webinar. And we invite one and all to this webinar. This webinar will be for about an hour from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And we have two distinguished speakers who will be speaking for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll have discussion. And we have an equally distinguished panel where we will have a panel discussion, and then we will end this program. So this program is on evidence-based medicine. The first speaker talk will be on evidence-based medicine and its utility for orthopedic surgeons. And it will be spoken by Dr. KVS Srinivas. And the second topic is literature search using internet, an essential tool for practicing evidence-based medicine. It will be spoken by none other than Dr. Ashok Shyam. We have a distinguished panel. And this panel comprises of Professor N.C. Mohapatra, who is the head of the Department of Postgraduate Institute at the SCB Medical College and Hospital. We have Professor Dr. Sakti Prasad Sir, who is the head of the department at the National Institute of Rehabilitation at Nirtar. And we have Professor Dr. Vishnu Patra, who is the head of the department of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Bhubaneswar. So this distinguished panelist, along with the speakers, we will have a panel discussion based on these two topics of discussion for today. And I also invite our president of the Odisha Orthopedic Association, Dr. D.K. Samantrai, and the honorary secretary of the association, Dr. Basant Kumar Behera. And we are very pleased to have them in our panel, and we would like them to be there during this program and take the message to our association about our involvement in basic science and research. Now, I will be very much inclined to be very particular about our OJOT organizing team. It is Dr. Saswat Samant, Dr. Saurabh Narayan Nanda, Dr. Sudhir Mohapatra, and Dr. Bikram Kumar Kar. Now, these four persons have been very, very instrumental in organizing everything until now, so that the program goes in a very smooth manner, and we hope that the transmission will be flawless and we'll have a lively discussion and presentation. And I will be moderating. I am Dr. Smarajit Patnaik. I am a senior consultant at the Apollo Hospitals, Bhubaneswar, and my co-moderator is Dr. Satyaranjan Patra, who is a professor at the High Tech Medical College, Bhubaneswar. So let me introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. R.V.S. Srinivas. Sir is a MS Orthopedics. He is a double FRCS from England and Glasgow. He is a FRCS of Trauma and Orthopedics. He has got his Applied Biomechanics Diploma, and presently he is a director and a consultant orthopedic surgeon at Sri Dharitri Orthopedic Hospital, Vijayawada. He is an associate editor of the Indian Journal of Orthopedics, associate editor of Journal of Clinical Orthopedics and Trauma, associate auditor of Official Journal of Indian Arthroscopy Society. He is a member of the Shoulder and Elbow Committee of the SICOT. He is a life member of the Society of Knee Surgeons of India. He is a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, fellow of the International College of Surgeons. He is a full-time member of Indian Medical Association Journal, associate member of International Society of Arthroscopy, Knee Surgery and Orthopedic Sports Medicine. He is a life member of the Indian Orthopedic Association, editorial board of the OSSAP, and is a life member of Indian Medical Association. Welcome, Dr. Srinivas, to this webinar. We are really fortunate to have you to start off the presentation from your side. And our next speaker is none other than Dr. Ashok Shyam. He doesn't require much of introduction. and India. He's an orthopedic surgeon who works at Sancheti Institute of Orthopedics. He heads the Indian Orthopedic Research Group and is a co-founder of the Indian Orthopedic Research Society. More than 100 scientific articles, publications in national and international journals. He has got 12 book chapters. He's the editor-in-chief of the Trauma International and the Journal of Orthopedic Case Reports. He's an associate editor for the Asian Journal of Arthroscopy and the Acta of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery. He's actively involved in academic research and he regularly conducts workshops and lectures in medical colleges and conferences. We are really happy and honored to have you, Dr. Ashok, amongst us. And we are really sort of grateful that you have given us an opportunity for the Odisha Orthopedic Association to showcase their webinar in the Ortho TV and also in the Indian Orthopedic Association TV. We are really grateful to you, sir. So we will have with this, I will stop sharing my screen and I will invite Dr. Srinivas to start his presentation. May I invite Dr. Srinivasan sir to come and share his screen and check his audio.
Hope you're able to see my screen.
We are able to see your screen, sir. And your audio is perfect.
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, everybody. I would like to thank the Odisha Orthopedic Association, the President, Dr. Dilip Kumar Samantre, and Secretary, Dr. Basant Kumar Behra, the organizing team, and Dr. Patnaik and Dr. Patra, and the Indian Journal of Orthopedics and Professor Maini for this opportunity. My job today is to talk on evidence-based medicine and its utility to orthopedic surgeon. Evidence-based medicine, more frequently called evidence-based healthcare, is defined as conscientious, explicit, judicious, and reasonable use of modern best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. The definition describes who it should be applied to, how it should be applied, and by whom it should be applied. Let's dive a little deeper into the definition. So we need to practice certain traits: conscientious, using conscience, wishing to do one's work or duty well and thoroughly, and explicit, stating clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. Judicious is showing good judgment of selecting the evidence, and reasonable, being fair and sensible and of sound judgment. And these are the traits of a surgeon that need to be practiced. The evidence should be modern and recent, and it should be applied to a single patient. So you have a single patient with you in the clinic and you are applying that to him. So it's basically what you do in everyday practice applied for each and every patient. So the definition describes who it should be applied to, how it should be applied, and by whom it should be applied. So there are three factors here. One is a surgeon, the other is a patient, and the third is the evidence guiding the surgeon to treat the patient. The surgeon needs to possess certain traits in order to practice evidence-based medicine. Evaluation of evidence needs to be conscientious, otherwise it becomes unethical. It has to be judicious, it could be illegal, otherwise it should be reasonable and having sound judgment, otherwise the treatment becomes unreasonable, and explicit. If not, it becomes an incompetent practice. If, for an example, in osteoarthritis of the knee, if one offers a total knee replacement in the early stages without proper indication, it is an over-treatment. And if that decision is made conscientiously, it becomes unethical. If one cannot judge stage properly and to offer total knee, it is injudicious and unreasonable. And if done at the right stage, but not properly, it's incompetent. So it's just a crude example. Evidence-based medicine covers the periphery of the core knowledge. Core knowledge is what we get from textbooks, established evidences, didactic lectures, and graduation studies. And evidence is new knowledge from journals, search engines, guidelines, registries, Cochrane Library, clinical practice guidelines. Logic or intuition-based medicine is outside EBM and core knowledge and is usually based on experience and logical reasoning. If there is no documented evidence or are sometimes evidence that we have not read or do not have time to read. For example, in an emergency in theater, we're exposed to a situation on table or clinical practice where we have to take a decision based on our core knowledge, by logical analysis of knowledge. These are incorporated, these may be incorporated into evidence base by executing studies later. If there is no logic or core or evidence base to treatment, it becomes quackery. The advantages of evidence-based medicine are it is backed by solid evidence to practice. Patients will have better results. It increases knowledge and skills of the surgeon. It will be medico-legally covered. It also increases the confidence of surgeon and patient satisfaction, as well as the confidence of patient on the treating surgeon. The disadvantages are it is time consuming, needs updating constantly. Evidence may change in future, especially in controversial topics. Sometimes it may be taken too far, and looking for evidence for every small thing we do. Local high quality evidence is better in some aspects than international evidence. We started medicine as opinion-based medicine. Before clinical trials, it was all opinion that were communicated by publications. First trial was done in 1747 on scurvy and smallpox. The first randomized controlled trial was done on tuberculosis in 1931. The first largest clinical trial was on Salk vaccine in 1954. And the roots of evidence-based medicine were laid by David Sackett and Gordon Guyot at McMaster University in Canada between 1970 and 1990. The first Cochrane Collaboration Center was established in Oxford in the year 2000 by Ian Chambers. The second center was established in 94 at McMaster University. And EBM in orthopedics was introduced as a section in JBJS in 2000. And JBJS published the levels of evidence in 2003. Once he published the first highest level of evidence in the form of guidelines on hip and knee osteoarthritis in 2008. This shows the level of evidence pyramid, starting from the weakest evidence at the base to strongest evidence at the apex, with clinical practice guidelines and health technology assessments. The weakest is an expert opinion or a letter to the editor, which does not include clinical data. Short communications are also included here. These are level 5 studies. Case reports and case series are considered level 4 because what we are doing here is merely reporting what we found. Even if a procedure was done in a case report, the evidence is not strong enough to recommend to all types of similar cases. Cohort is a group of similar patients, whereas case series is a group of similar cases. Cohort studies, we could observe them backwards in time when it's called retrospective, or forwards when it's called prospective. And all through groups are generally clubbed under observational studies. Experimental studies are those having two groups of subjects. One group is a case and the other is a control. A case control study is one such study, and you could have two groups allotted different procedures like evaluating anatomical and non-anatomical reconstructions, ligament reconstructions of the knee to evaluate outcomes. If there is no randomization, it's a non-randomized study, and if there's randomized and control, it's called randomized controlled trial. These are a double-blinded randomized controlled trial is a level 1 study. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis with evidence from randomized controlled trial is level 1 study. There are some systematic reviews which evaluate case series. The evidence level for these comes below, usually lower actually. Case control studies and RCTs are considered level 2. This pyramid shows the levels of evidence in relation to the pyramid. Majority of studies in orthopedics fall in the box. They are under observational or experimental studies. Under observational, you have descriptive case reports, case series, cross-sectional studies, or analytical studies, which are cross-sectional studies, case control studies, or cohort studies. Under experimental studies, these are interventional studies. There are randomized controlled trials, non-randomized trials, self-controlled or crossover studies. Majority of articles are original articles encompassing 70% of them. They study cause and effect, procedure and outcomes, and randomized controlled trials. 20% of articles are reviews. As shown here, narrative reviews are usually invited. Systematic reviews are done by area experts. Meta-analysis are done by Apex institutes. So you can see the quality of evidence coming out from each of these types of studies. 10% of articles are of low evidence, including letters to the editor, opinions, reviews, etc. These are evidence-based articles. They too have a value. They generally give direction to new research or raise issues in current research. So how to do evidence-based medicine? The clinical questions should be clearly delineated. Thorough search for the literature should be performed related to the questions. Literature should be critically appraised for available evidence, and its applicability to a clinical situation should be assessed, and a balanced application of conclusions to the problem should be made. So where do we find these high quality evidences? They are in the form of clinical practice guidelines, health technology appraisals, NICE guidelines from the UK, from England, SIGN guidelines from Scotland, AAOS guidances from the USA, ortho evidence from Canada. They gather high quality evidence, and Cochrane Library stores high quality studies and gives guidance on how to conduct high quality systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis repositories also may be looked into for evidence. Websites like Prospero to see if there's any work done on your search terms. Just going through some of these areas where you can get evidence from. Ortho Evidence is based in Canada. This resource was founded in 2009 and headed by Dr. Mohit Bhandari, who is well-known orthopedic figure in evidence-based medicine. He has published a lot on evidence-based medicine. If you want a good source on orthopedics, this is a good source. Evidence is presented in the following formats given here: synopsis, funding details, why the study needed now, what was the principal question, what were the important findings, what should I remember most from this study, and how will this affect my care of my patient. NICE is from the England. The guidance, they give guidance on clinical management of cases. I have given here an example here. It's for primary tranexamic acid used for primary elective hip and knee replacement. It says give IV tranexamic acid, so there's no conflict there. There's a clear evidence to give. If there is no renal impairment, we can give 1 gram to 2 grams of topical intra-articular tranexamic acid diluted in saline, and ensure total dose does not cross 3 grams. If there is renal impairment, the dose is reduced. So you can see the type of guidances we get from the clinical practice guidelines. SIGN guidance stands for Scottish Intercollegiate Guidance Network. This evidence is taken from SIGN guidance on osteoporosis. You can see here that there are risk factors that are cleanly defined. Quantification of risk factors are defined. Recommendation is given for management of osteoporosis in postmenopausal women, and the indication for a system of care to certain groups. AAOS, we are all familiar with. It gives AAOS also gives guidances. It gives rating on each recommendation ranging from 1 to 9. 1 to 3 is rarely appropriate due to lack of clear benefit or advantage. 4 to 6 is maybe appropriate. Here there is a degree of uncertainty for the recommendation, indicating some research is needed to further classify the indication. 7 to 9 is appropriate, meaning treatment is generally acceptable and is a reasonable approach for the indication. This is an AUC table given by the AAOS for osteoarthritis of the knee. AUC stands for appropriate use criteria. There are 3 recommendations here. R is rarely appropriate, M may be appropriate, and A is appropriate. I have only given 2 scenarios here, and the college gives recommendations for the 2 given scenarios. There are multiple scenarios in osteoarthritis knee, which they have given recommendations for each of those scenarios. The second column gives treatment. Third column shows appropriateness of treatment. Next column gives the rating, and the last column shows level of agreement between voting panel members. Based on assessment of evidence in literature, recommendations may be made according to GRADE recommendations. GRADE is an acronym, and there are 4 levels here: high, moderate, low, and very low. High grade evidence means further research is unlikely to change our confidence in the estimate of effect. Moderate quality means further research is likely to have an important effect. And low quality means further research is likely to have an important effect on our confidence in the estimate of effect and is likely to change the estimate. Very low means an estimate of effect is very uncertain. In the resources also that we have seen, the similar grading has been used, if not the same. Another very useful site is the TRIP database. TRIP stands for Turning Research into Practice. It is based in Wales in the UK and provides a search engine where you can search for high quality evidence on a particular topic. It has 2 types of searches: a basic search where it's very much like a PubMed search, and a PICO search, and both of these which you may be hearing from Dr. Ashok Shyam after this talk. The advanced and research searches are for paid customers only and those who have subscription. The TRIP gives evidence-based synopsis on clinical questions, systematic reviews, guidelines, core research, e-textbooks, and core medical journals with high impact factors from the Medline. TRIP works closely with the Department of Family Medicine at Laval University, Quebec, Canada in this process. And the department has put together a directory of clinical information websites, which includes over 100 clinically appraised websites. And it has spidering software, which is then used to visit URLs entered into the database and grabs the content of that particular page. It is then processed and ready to be searched in the TRIP database. The database is updated monthly. When TRIP searches PubMed, it uses clinical queries search filters offered in PubMed that limit the search results to a specific clinical query category. For example, therapy, diagnosis, prognosis, or etiology. The algorithm uses 3 main factors when deciding position of a particular search. And these are text score, publication score, and date. There are other websites and databases have been initiated to provide high quality evidence. The list is given here. Some are not updated. This is the output of evidence mapping from a TRIP database. If you click on evidence maps, after putting in a search for the evidence map, here, for an example, I have put in hip fracture, and this page comes up. An evidence map shows up. This is how an evidence map looks like. It's basically a bubble graph. You can see on the side here that as we go up, the evidence is more likely to be effective. And we can see that surgery is the most effective here for hip fracture. It also says here that the risk of bias is low if it is green and high if it is violet. The size of circle gives the sample size. And if you click on surgery, a pop-up window opens up, something which looks like this. It will look like tiny dots distributed in 4 quadrants. As you can see, the quadrants at the top are positive sentiments and quadrants at the bottom are negative sentiments. The dots are colored too. The color code is given here: randomized controlled trials, and violet is systematic reviews. The area of circle is indicated in the sample size. If you point a cursor to a dot, it gives the conclusion. Supposing I put a point here, it gives a conclusion of the study like this, and it opens. And if you click on the dot, it opens up the relevant, the PubMed page for that evidence. So you have all the high quality evidences from PubMed grouped here for that particular topic and arranged according to sentiments, the quality of study, and the sample sizes in one place. So it is a very well planned and thought out system that gives you the nuts and bolts of how a particular recommendation is made and gives the relevant high quality evidence on that subject. I would recommend you to go through this website and explore. TRIP also gives some values here for each intervention, the number of published articles, the score given, the number of samples, and the risk of bias. So, evidence-based medicine. So what is the evidence for evidence-based medicine? Evidence-based medicine training. This study actually looks at the evidence-based medicine training, whether it improves doctors' knowledge, practice, or patient outcomes. There is evidence. This is a systematic review of the evidence. So there's evidence that it improves short-term knowledge and skills as reported by this study. And there is no evidence of improvement on long-term knowledge and attitudes and the clinical practice. However, this study has not mentioned patient outcomes and experiences. So what is the future of evidence-based medicine? As we have seen before, EBM covers attitudes of surgeon, and when we evaluate EBM, we should also be able to evaluate the attitudes and also including patients in the evaluation. We should find a way to assess these in order to assess how EBM has improved practice. EBM should be independent of all interests, whether commercial, ideological, or political. It is allied to, but slightly separate from and serving a different function than the original science. To summarize, EBM arose from a need to consolidate increasing evidence in research. There is good evidence that it improves practice, but further studies are needed to establish its role. So it's best to identify highest quality evidence in your clinical practice and exercise evidence-based medicine to improve the clinical practice. Thank you once again for the opportunity to talk in this wonderful forum.
Thank you, sir. There are a few questions for Dr. Srinivasan. So would you like to take the questions now, or we'll take it in the end?
As you decide, sir.
I think as the topics are unrelated, it will be better if you take the question now.
Okay, fine.
Maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. So there is a question that does evidence-based medicine always guides us in the right direction, especially when there is a conflict between research data available, the clinical data, and the patient perspective?
It actually depends on the question itself. It depends on the strength of the evidence. If you have a very good, strong evidence available, as we have seen the apex of the pyramid, if you have a clinical practice guideline or a health technology appraisal available as an evidence for the question you want answers for, then it is a good source to take. It is always good to have that evidence for your practice. It also depends on the doctor's experience, the surgeon's experience, the facilities available, whether you can apply that evidence or not. And also keeping in mind that the evidence comes from these high quality evidences are coming from the West. You can see that the centers are all located either in the UK or in the USA or Canada. So their population is slightly different from our population. We should always keep that in mind before we apply the evidence to our population.
Fine. I think that's you have answered that thing very rightly. So, what are the basically what are the conditions where we should more rely on clinical data which we have compared to the research data which is available?
Sorry, I'm not very clear with this. Can you give an example? Clinical data and research data?
Yeah, suppose we have a clinical data suggesting something, and we have a research data which is available is different from that. So which one we should more give importance to, the clinical data? I mean, the clinical perspective which we have is more important, or the basically the research data which we go through?
Well, again, it will depend on the level of evidence we have. If the research level evidence is very good, level 1 results, then I would go with that. If the evidence is not that good, if the level of evidence, the highest evidence available for that particular question is not high,
Fine.
then I would give weightage. As you go lower along the pyramid, I would give more weightage to to your clinical judgment than relying on the evidence available.
Right.
Can I ask one question? Shakti, can I ask one question?
Yes, yes.
Does a high quality of L1 therapeutic study always translates to the high quality recommendation grade in clinical practice? Hello, Dr. Srinivas?
Yeah, the high quality studies are, as we have seen, clinical practice guidelines and health technology appraisals, these are actually formulated by, the evidence is taken from very high quality studies, and they were formulated by experts in that field. So if we have evidence available in those, in that form, I would take that, give more weightage to that evidence.
There is one more question. What methodologic safeguards you need to incorporate in clinical research to move it to a higher level in the hierarchy of evidence?
Nowadays, we have guidelines on how to do clinical research. So if you want to do a randomized controlled trial, there are a list of things that we have to comply with before we do a randomized controlled trial. So as we have seen from the pyramid, the systematic reviews, meta-analysis, they're actually a compilation of evidence, so they're not directly clinical. Whereas the randomized controlled trials, double-blinded randomized controlled trials, they are the clinical trials. So if we have very high quality, a well-done randomized controlled trial, our evidence as a systematic review or meta-analysis also will be of high quality.
Okay, fine. We'll take a question from Dr. Sakti Prasad, Professor Dr. Sakti Prasad Das.
No, not question exactly, by some comments, I think. Previously, when in the early phase, we are according to WHO guidelines, we are this impairment, disability, handicap, we are using these classifications, and in which our range of movements, this criteria we are using. Nowadays, in the time of internal classification of functions, so now thinking is changing. It depends upon the outcome is different now also in all research aspects, including the, it depends upon also the environment in musculoskeletal science. This is the only.
Okay, fine. I'll take the last question for Dr. Srinivas. There is a question from the Ortho TV. Can logic-based evidence be medico-legally challenged? Can it be challenged medico-legally in the court of law?
It can be challenged. We have used logic to treat, sometimes when you don't have evidence available readily to take a decision, we depend on our core knowledge to make a logical decision and treat the patient. So any decision, even a decision based on the highest quality, can be challenged in court. But if your decision is based on sound judgment, then the chances of that standing are very low.
I have a question, Dr. Srinivas. In your clinical practice, have you ever faced that your evidence-based medicine has been detrimental in your clinical practice?
I haven't felt actually. I feel if that happens, it's possibly because of misinterpreting highest quality evidence. If you have a highest quality evidence available, it usually does not happen. But if it is not a highest quality evidence, then it is possible that you may be harming, because what we have to look at is what evidence you have and what that evidence is done for. You know, what that study involves, which type of population is involved, and what outcome measures they have done. So you have to directly apply those to the patient you are treating. Can that be applied to your patient? This is what you have to see.
Sir, do
Yeah.
you mean to say that the strength of recommendation is synonymous with the level of evidence?
No, the strength of recommendation was actually taken from the evidence available. So you could actually say indirectly that it's similar to the level of evidence. Usually when the level of evidence is very high, the strength of recommendation also will be high.
How does the patient values matter in the level of evidence, sir?
Sorry?
This is what evidence-based medicine incorporates actually. When you are, as I have told you before, there are three aspects to evidence-based medicine. One is the surgeon, the other one is the patient, and the third one is the evidence you are applying. So obviously, when you are applying your evidence to the patient factors also come into this. So evidence-based medicine incorporates the patient and the values of the patient.
Marajit.
Okay. I think for the need of time, we will go on to our next speaker, Dr. Ashok Sham. So Dr. Ashok will be talking on literature search using internet, an essential tool for practicing evidence-based medicine. Dr. Ashok, please share your screen and check your audio.
Hi. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Okay. First of all, thanks to Odisha Orthopedic Association and the Odisha Journal of Orthopedic and Trauma for inviting us for this excellent webinar on research. I think this is one of the rare webinars that are happening on research and research methodology in the country. So hats off to Odisha Orthopedic Association. So this is my introduction, and these are all my disclaimers also. So doing a literature review is really a needed art. I will not call it science, it's kind of art, because the number of articles that are getting added per day or per week into literature. Now with COVID lockdown, the number is much more. This is, I think, 2-3 years old number. To find the relevant article is like finding a needle in a haystack. So like Dr. Srinivas mentioned, we have various databases to do that. So what I'm going to do today is give you a practical demonstration with certain principles on how to do the literature search on internet. I'll not go into paid databases. I'll keep it open, free databases. Mostly I'm going to cover just two. So PubMed and Google Scholar. These are the two things that I'm going to cover. And like I said, I'll be focusing more on the practical aspect on how to do it in your clinics or how to do when you're writing a paper or a thesis. So that's my talk today. World Wide Web is a vast data bank. It doesn't answer to specific queries. We have to get answer. It's like extracting the answers from the internet. Okay. So we have to use certain concepts to get those answers from any database. So I'll take you through those concepts. There are totally 5 of them. This is the first concept of keywords. Now, keywords are defined by the topic. They are generally in PICO format. There is a T also, but I keep it simple. It's a population, intervention, control, and outcome measure. So this is an example that I've been taking for years now and will continue with that. but a lot of patients come and ask whether there is a difference between this implant or that implant. So this is a good example to take that. Conventional TKR and high flexion TKR, is there any difference? So how are you going to do a literature review on this particular topic? And how do you proceed with the internet search? So this is the PICO format. PICO is one of the most important formats to be remembered. It is the basic of your literature search. You get this correct and most of the things are mostly mechanical. This is another example where you have to explain to patient whether endoscopic discectomy better or microdiscectomy is better in terms of patient outcome, functional outcome. So again, example for PICO. So I'm just stressing on how important the PICO is. So these are the two resources that I'm going to cover, mostly Google Scholar and PubMed. Let's start with PubMed. PubMed has renovated the website in 2019 and has added many more features. I find it to be a very good, wholesome database to do my literature review. I think it has maximum number of citations that are available, articles that are available. So I rely mostly on PubMed and secondly on Google Scholar. This is how we start on PubMed search. We start typing our keywords and it is giving us options or suggesting us various keywords into it. Once I type and click search, I get around 35,000 articles on this subject of total knee arthroplasty. But you cannot go through all these articles. Like I said, finding relevant information is like finding the needle in haystack. So we're going to learn how to find that needle from this haystack of 35,000 articles. Okay. So a lot of these articles are really not on this patient, not on TKR. For example, this article is on skeletal metastasis and not at all, but still patient population had TKR patients. So it is shown in that list by PubMed. So how to make PubMed give you most valuable articles? So this is the second concept of fields. Fields are in square bracket after the keywords. There are multiple of them. I'll explain you what they mean. They tell PubMed where to search the keyword. So if you put TI, title in bracket after the keyword, PubMed will search only in titles of the article. So that's how the concept of field develops. I'll show you by example. So again, the same keyword I'm using and I'm adding TI, so title. So this word is searched only in titles of the articles. That means they're more relevant to our search. So I get 13,000. So it is reduced to 1/3 from 35,000 to 13,000. Okay. If I add title and abstract, that means the amount of text increases where the keyword is searched. So I get more articles. This is for rare diseases where you get less number of articles. You can increase and decrease the number of articles by doing this title, and abstract. But like we discussed, we have multiple keywords from PICO format, at least 2 or 3. So how to deal with multiple keywords? There's a concept of Boolean operators on PubMed. There are 3 of them, and, or, and not. Mostly we just use and, rarely we use or. Not, I have never been using it in all my literature reviews. So I'll just explain you the concept of this Boolean operators. They define the relationship between different keywords, whether the keywords are together in the article or whether they are exclusive in the article or they are individually present but still gives you the entire list. For example, here I'm using or as the operator. So it will give me all the articles containing the first word, the second word, as well as both the words. So when I'm using or, it gives me 45,000 results, more than the first keyword. Okay. However, if I'm using and, it is going to give me article containing only both the keywords. So this is very important. So that narrows down the results. So for example, I'm using and here, first keyword, first operator, first Boolean operator, second keyword, and these are the fields. So I get 541 results. So from 35,000, I've come down to 500, which looks manageable. So that's how I'm trying to narrow down my search. However, is field enough? So many times the authors use different words for to explain the same concept. So total knee arthroplasty, total knee replacement, TKR, TK, all these are used by various authors in various geographic locations. in their article. So if I do a title search on TKA only, I'll miss all the other articles. So what is the solution for this? So PubMed has this innovative solution called mesh terms. Mesh is medical subject heading. Okay. What it does is it tells on which subject the article is. Okay. So this is an abstract of an article in PubMed. If you just go below here on the right side, you get something called as mesh terms. Once you click on it, it shows you what are the mesh terms related to that particular subject. Okay. So that is how I go to search in mesh. This is the mesh terms that I'm using. The most important part, okay, not going into confusion about mesh at all. Most important part of mesh is it can be used as a field. Okay. So you take the mesh term. This is the mesh term. This is the field. I'm using mesh as the field. This is the operator, the first one, second keyword, second field, second operator, and the third keyword is high flexion. Once I click the entire search query in PubMed, it gives me 10 results which are most relevant. So that's how we come down from 35,000 to 10 results. That's finding the needle in haystack. So within 4 steps, we could find this most relevant articles. Okay. Now PubMed has this thing called as advanced search builder, which makes this entire process very, very simple. Okay. So if I click on that, it opens me the advanced search builder. Everything is in drop down here. So what I can do is I can select what field I am going to put in. So I can put my keywords there, select my fields there, and add my Boolean operators there. Okay. This page is very important for us on PubMed. So I put in my search queries. This is all my search queries here in the PubMed search builder according to the principles that we have covered till now. Once I click search, it gives me the most relevant 5 results. So this is the second example that I have taken. So that's how we go from a vast data bank to a very narrow search that we require. Once we get into this and practice it regularly, it is very easy to do this in our clinics also on our mobile phones. Okay, so you can do that. So PubMed has 3 concepts: field search, Boolean operator, and mesh search. It just requires practice. It's a very good website to register. Do register on it. After you register, you get a lot of things. For example, you get the filters. So you can select your filters, what kind of article you need, whether free, what kind of date range you need, what kind of journal you read. So you can select those filters. You can create alerts for yourself. You can also have various display options. This is also when you are not logged in. So you can select how many articles to display in per page, etc. Okay. So it's a very good website. You need to register on it. Registration is free. Like Srinivas was mentioning, this is a new thing added to PubMed called clinical queries. It's still not very well developed. They're still developing it. But once you click on it, for example, I have typed a query here, ACL tear. It gives me a good amount of articles. I can select from here diagnosis, prognosis, or etiology, etc. I can narrow the scope, so it will take more recent articles, but still not fully developed. Maybe in a year or two, this will become more and more specific and will be available to us. Cochrane Review is one of the good websites for level 1 evidence. Also, it shows other evidence, but for level 1 evidence, this is the site to go. It also has a search box here, as you can see. The search here is a bit restrictive, but not as easy as PubMed, but it also has these options. So once you click on, for example, here I click on lumbar disc herniation and click search, it gives me different kinds of articles here. It has these fields you can select. It also has Pico search, which they are developing still. So they are still development phase. The principle remains the same for searching this database also. So when you're searching for level 1 evidence, you can go to Cochrane database and do your search. Okay. These are all the new things that Cochrane has been adding. Pico is a new format that we have. Google and Google Scholar are very useful for us because we use them regularly. I got say 3-4 minutes more. I'll just finish it in fast. So earlier Google was doing most of the things, but now Google has shifted everything academic to Google Scholar. So for example, here I'm searching torticollis in adults because maybe a adult patient of torticollis come in my OPD. I just go to Google Scholar, type there, and click search. It gives me a lot of articles that are there, and it also gives me time range where to select. I just scroll down and find this article, which is from India, so maybe more important, relevant to my clinical scenario. This is what I call it as a template paper. This is the fifth concept. So we finished 4 concepts: keywords, fields, Boolean operators, and now this is the fifth concept of mesh terms, and this is the fifth concept of template paper. Now, template paper, once you get it, it's very important for us, especially for writing thesis. Okay. So if you click on the cited, it will give you all the recent articles published after the template paper in Google Scholar. Okay. If you click on related, it will give you all the old plus recent articles. So these are the list of articles that are related to this particular topic. If you click on versions, it will take you all the versions that the article is available. You can select the PubMed version. Once you click on PubMed version, it will take you to the PubMed page where you can find more related articles to this. So Google Scholar, you have to add PubMed to your key phrase if you're doing on Google. Select most relevant article, that is your template article. Go to related, go to citing, and go to PubMed. So that completes your literature review kind of thing. Google Scholar also has a basic search builder, but it's very, very primitive. That's the advanced search, but it's not advanced at all. It's very, very primitive. Probably they'll develop within years to come. So this is how the Google search builder works. Google and PubMed I use interchangeably. I start with Google, then go to PubMed and come back and through. So in literature review on internet, I find this 4 lists. List 1 is PubMed keyword list, very useful in our clinical practice in our OPDs. List 2, 3, and 4 we use when we are writing an article or writing a thesis. Okay. So we need a proper research question in PICO format in PubMed to do a literature search. So I'll take you through 3 examples. If you're taking a general question, for example, role of statin in cardiovascular disease, when you do a go to PubMed search and do statin with cardiovascular disease, it will give you only 88 results. So there is something wrong that you're doing. So most likely what you're doing wrong is you're not putting the mesh terms. What you need to do is find the mesh terms. Mesh terms are in older articles. Mesh terms are done manually by PubMed. So it takes time for new articles to get their mesh terms. So select an article 3-4 months earlier. You'll get the mesh terms. The mesh term for statin is this. Once I use that in my search, I get 17,000 articles. So I get more relevant articles. So using mesh terms is important. Okay. Third is when you want to do just review on a subject, say spondylolisthesis. Just go to search builder, select mesh major topic and put your keyword and click search. You will get most relevant articles from here. Then you can select from your filters to narrow your range from last 2 years or last 5 years, and you will get the most relevant articles on the topic. Citation matching is a small concept in PubMed where you can, when you just remember small details about the article, say just the author and just a broad topic and year, you can search and it will give you the most relevant article. This is a clinical scenario. How do you do this in your clinical practice in your OPD? 65-year-old woman with dorsal comminution comes to my OPD. What do? I put these keywords, distal radius, dorsal comminution, elderly in my search builder on PubMed. And I click search. I get 0 results. Okay. Many a times this will happen that you get 0 results. So what is the issue? What you can do is reduce the number of keywords. So I do just with 2 keywords and I get 5 relevant articles. I go through them. The third article gives me what I need. So it gives me an indication that this patient can be treated non-operatively. Okay. This is how we use in our clinical practice. So searching PubMed or searching literature, it requires a structured approach, requires practice, and requires constant learning. So thanks very much for that. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ashok. Wonderful
Thank you.
presentation and fine. So any questions, or we'll go to the panel discussion, and during that discussion we can take few questions. We
Yes.
have 5 more minutes to go. So can I do my screen sharing?
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. So what is the evidence that evidence-based medicine works out? I think this is Dr. Srinivasan has already spoken about it, and we have discussed at length about it also. And is evidence often biased, and what do we mean by best quality evidence? This is again has been well deliberated and during his presentation and discussed also. And does evidence-based medicine always guides us in the right direction? This is also we have discussed at length after his talk. So how to proceed when different databases provide with conflicting evidence? This we can start discussing from this point. And I would like our panelists to also get involved during this discussion. So, Dr. Ashok, would you start by starting to tell how to proceed when different databases provide us with conflicting evidences? So how
So your aim is to make a clinical decision for your patient. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So, like Srinivas explained, clinical decision making is three-pronged. Literature is just one part of it. So we have literature, we have clinical experience of the surgeon and the surgeon's ability, and third is the patient's preference. So you have all three in equal ways. I consider them all three equally important for making a clinical decision. So wait. Okay. So, like I said, getting conflicting evidence in databases. I'm getting some. Okay. Yeah. So getting conflicting evidences in different databases is actually more common than you think of. What you need to do is select papers or select research that is more relevant to your local population and more relevant to your practice. Like I showed you when selecting the template paper, I selected a paper from India.
Yes.
I selected a paper which is done by an Indian surgeon, which is more relevant to me. That's how you select and take into consideration evidence. Again, I said evidence is 1/3 of decision making. It's not 100% at all. It's 1/3. Okay, so even if there is conflict in evidence, you see what best you can do from your perspective, which surgery you can do best, and based on that, select that evidence, explain to the patient that this is how the evidence is, these are the complications, this is the success rate, let him take a call. Yeah.
Anything else, Dr. Vishnu, would you like to comment on that or ask on that?
I want to ask
Please go ahead. Let Saktisa tell, then Vishnu will tell.
Okay. So in the this cascade of the level of evidence, whether this clinical practice guidelines are superior than the level 1 studies or not, that I want to ask.
You want to take that, Srinivas?
Yes. As we have seen from the pyramid, clinical practice guidelines, health technology appraisals, systematic reviews, and meta-analysis, they are high. A double-blinded randomized controlled trial also may be considered level 1. A well-conducted study may be considered level 1. Non-randomized studies or non-blinded randomized studies, they come under level 2.
But clinical practice guidelines are not available in all the types of studies.
Yes, I agree. So if you don't have a highest quality evidence available, you go for the next available evidence. So what we do is basically search for the literature, look at the evidence. Initially, we look at clinical practice guidelines, see if there are any available for your question. If they are not available, then look at any systematic reviews available or meta-analysis. If they are available, then you take the evidence from that. If that is also not available, look for randomized control trials, and that's how you go down the pyramid.
What is best practice guidelines?
Sorry.
Anything like that? Anything like that? Best practice guidelines?
The clinical practice guidelines, sir wants to know, there is also a term called best practice guidelines. So any difference between best practice guidelines and clinical practice guidelines, or it is only a play of words?
I have not heard much about best practice guidelines. There's a website which actually provides evidence. It's called best practice or something like that. I would think both are same, clinical and best practice.
So I have a slightly different take on the guidelines part. The practice guidelines can be defined into levels, various level 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on what is the source. Suppose the practice guideline is sourced on articles that are level 4 only, then it is a level 4 practice guideline. But if the practice guideline is based on level 1 evidence on meta-analysis and systematic reviews and RCTs, then it is a level 1 practice guideline. Most of the guidelines will mention their level of evidence or mention their strength. Okay, so when you are looking at the practice guidelines, go through it. They will mention what are the level of evidence for each inference that they are making, and based on what. So source is important. So practice guidelines again like cumulative. So for example, meta-analysis is cumulative of RCTs, but it leaves out level 3, 4 or level 2 evidence. The practice guidelines include them. Some of the systematic reviews also include them. So they include all levels of evidence and gives you a thesis of what the guideline will be. So that's what my take is. Depends on what the source is.
And Dr. Vishnu, you have to say anything about this?
I'd like to share my experience. When I started doing my arthroplasty, then I searched whether I should use the drain or not use the drain. Then I found thousands of papers who support using of a drain and 1,000 papers who support not using the drain. And both are at a different level of evidence. So it is really difficult for me to judge what to do. Then I thought of where I've got the training, and I got training different places. Then I found different modalities also. So in such a scenario, it is very, very difficult for a beginner to have his own clinical practice, because there is no other way out other than he has the evidence-based medicine. But when you go through a clinical practice like 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, you understand what is best for you. So basically, I can say that your clinical practice will come only after 7 to 10 years of a practice, and evidence-based medicine will definitely guide you and sometimes misguide you for your early interventions.
I'll disagree with that. So you are saying you are a fresher, but you've already done your arthroplasty fellowship or your training. What you have seen in your training is what the evidence you follow.
No,
that's the clinical experience of your surgeons, your teachers. You follow that. You'll find evidence. It is good if you find evidence for both using no drain and using drain. That means both are acceptable practices. There can be multiple best practices, like someone was saying. Using drain and using not drain, both are equally effective. You can use either. It's good. We are following evidence-based medicine. Depending on training, you can make a decision.
Dr. Sam, I like to say, if both are same, then don't you think you're adding so many extra things for surgery? You are adding so many things to the pollution of this country. So it is better we should not use it.
Yeah. So that is the logic given by the people who are not using drain. But people who are using drain have different kind of logic. So that's why there is a conflict, and that's why research goes on the point. That's why we have debates on this particular topic on almost all arthroplasty conferences. You have what you're saying is what you want to follow in your practice. You follow what you feel is rational in your thinking based on your experience, based on literature and based on patient preference.
No, my question is how the evidence-based medicine will help him.
It is providing evidence for both, so you can choose either.
Okay.
In court of law, if you say I'm not using drain, it is acceptable, and somebody is using drain, both is acceptable. In court of, not only court of law, but even for clinical scenarios, both is acceptable. You're presenting in, say, IOCON, you present with drain, nobody is going to question you why you're using drain. You both are acceptable practices.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, can I ask one question?
Yeah, please, sir, go ahead.
There are several several rating systems of level of evidence. Okay, like one by Oxford and other by grade system. And they often the level 1 of one system does not match with L1 of other system, rating system. Which one to follow actually?
I think Dr. Ashok, you can go for this.
I think Dr. Srinivas is more apt for. Maybe I'll add comment after Srinivas' comment.
Sure.
I think if you look at the pyramid that I have presented, more or less most of the studies, most of the places that is the level that we are using. But in my presentation, I have shown you the clinical practice guidelines when they come out, the highest level, how they rate their studies, how they rate their evidence. It's not uniform. So they have given their rating differently. But what is important here is which is the highest rating, highest rated evidence. So as long as they have given the highest rated evidence clearly, we don't need to bother too much about how they have, how many steps they have taken for rating. But the standard classification of studies and the pyramid for classifying the levels of evidence is almost universally accepted.
Okay.
I'll add to that since this inception of EBM, the pyramid has been revised more than 7 or 8 times. So EBM is a evoluting branch. It has not reached its epitome. It's still developing. So as the more advanced techniques for reducing bias, as more advanced research methodologies are developed, the evidence becomes stronger and stronger, and that's how we keep on revising the hierarchies, and we keep on revising the grades of evidence. So this is going to happen. It's not fixed. Okay. So as and when the technologies improves, statistics in methodologies, we'll have better evidence pyramids and better grades of evidence going on. So you have to select based on, again, I find it an irony that level of evidence is given to us by an expert panel, depending on all the things, and we have to accept it as they say it. Many of us don't even understand the intricacies of grade of evidence or strength of evidence or grading of clinical practice guidelines. We don't understand the intricacies of it, but we have to accept it on face value. I mean,
I agree.
Very difficult to understand a meta-analysis, or a meta-analysis is so difficult to understand. But we have to take the inferences of the authors as we took the experiences of our seniors, of our teachers on face value. Of course, it is peer reviewed and it can be cross-checked, but by people who are interested in it. But still, most of us take it on face value. Yeah.
Just one more thing, the example I have presented from I think it's a NICE guidelines on tranexamic acid. It may not be applicable for this case, but for other cases where drugs are involved. So they have recommended up to 3 grams tranexamic acid may be given. But, the use of tranexamic acid itself is not conflicted. So it has benefits. It is recommended. We can use it. but the dosage you have to decide depending on who you're using. So their population is different, our population is different. So we have to take a decision on that ourselves. So just because it is given in clinical practice guidelines, we should not be blindly following it. We apply our judgment to it and take a decision on that.
I agree with you, Dr. Ashok. This is a evolutionary concept. This I sometimes some papers are also coming review of the systemic reviews, review of the meta-analysis.
Absolutely.
I will give you an example. Suppose patient reported outcome. Sometimes we are a range of movement or fracture union. We are telling that this is the outcome. Now I find some literature. If you will ask the patient whether he will refer the other patient to the same hospital for the same disease or not, this is one outcome. So this is going on changing day by day.
Yes,
so
it is.
We have to read and we have to follow it.
Well, I would like to ask Dr. Sam another final question maybe. So you are a master of this art and science of internet search of literature. But please suggest to our listeners who are basically postgraduate students and residents, any easy way how to master this, or they have to depend on professionals to get all their literature search.
I think PubMed is very, very good. Focus just on one database. For beginners, just focus on PubMed. You'll get most relevant data. And of course, Google. So I've given you a 5-step procedure. You can easily follow it and practice it and get it. If you're talking about free full text articles, is that what your question is?
Yes. I was asking how to master this art and science or depend on professionals to search.
No, they have to do it themselves.
Practice.
This is the basic framework that I've given on 5 steps, on 5 concepts. They can easily follow it and do it themselves. They just need to practice. They have to do it. If you're practicing, if you're in clinical practice, literature review is not only for writing thesis or paper, it is for clinical practice also. So in your OPD, patients are more well-versed with reviewing data and or reviewing medical conditions online. They'll come to you that Google is saying this. How are you going to counter them if you don't know to do a literature review within seconds? So it's a very important art to learn. To do a literature review within seconds on your phone, very useful in your clinical practice, in your day-to-day practice in future. So they have to learn it and do it themselves.
Another question you raised actually regarding everybody can afford to get all these free papers, free articles. So how to get some important without subscribing? And that's what may be useful for some friends.
So there are few methods onto it. The first one is to ask the authors. Many a times you'll get their emails in the papers. Write an email, they'll send you. Second is a website called ResearchGate, which gives a lot of free articles that are uploaded by the authors themselves. You can Google search the title of the article with PDF in it. Google search with names of the authors, and you might get free full text available on author's website also. Then there is a website called Sci-Hub. Okay, so you can just type and Google it, and there are a lot of free articles there also. So you can utilize all these resources, and almost 80-90% of times you'll get those articles from the authors or from other sources. Yeah.
Thank you. Smarajit, you take over.
Thank you very much. We are already 14 minutes past our scheduled time from 6 to 7 p.m. So it has been a very, very fruitful discussion and wonderful talking by Dr. Srinivas and Dr. Ashok. So we are really grateful, and we really thank you from the Orthopedic Association, Odisha Orthopedic Association. And I thank the panelists, the esteemed panelists, Professor Nirmal Mohapatra, Professor Sakti Prasad Das, and Professor Vishnu Patra. And my colleague unfortunately has not been able to join, Dr. Satya Patra. Anyway, from Odisha Orthopedic Association, we thank you for joining us and spending this Sunday evening with us, for your valuable time and your knowledge which you have shared with us. and hope we will continue this journey long further. And during this pandemic year, there is a special request my editor might give you to Dr. Ashok for consideration for our subscription.
Hey.
Okay.
No, not like that. This is not the forum.
Okay.
But I must thank Dr. Sam on behalf of Odisha Journal of Orthopedics and Trauma for regularly publishing our articles and our journal, even if the time of constraint and difficulty. Thank you, Dr. Sam.
Thank you.
for all this.
Thank you.